Hi everyone, my name's Lee Broom. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's actually my first time in Toronto. Well, actually it's my first time in Canada, so it took me a while to get here. But I was super excited to be invited, and I love cities, and your city is very beautiful. It's bloody freezing, I have to say, and I come from London and it's cold there, but this is something else. But I know it's actually not very cold for you guys at the minute, but no, everybody has been super warm and very friendly, and I just wanted to thank the IDS team as well for looking after me so well. And I'm excited to talk to you all about my work, and I hope that you enjoy what I have to say. So I've had a very unusual route into this world of design, so I wanted to share with you my background from starting out in theatre, moving into fashion, then into interiors and products. And I really wanted to talk about how all of those disciplines have influenced me as a designer and really kind of shaped my career, but also more specifically how they've influenced the products I've created and the interiors that I've designed and the shows that I've put on. So in order to do that, what I want to do is go sort of back to the very beginning, to when I was a child growing up in the Midlands in England. And this is... Yeah. I was a fairly flamboyant child, and my parents picked up on this from a very early age and were actually very supportive of it, and so much so that they actually enrolled me into theatre school. And I was at theatre school from the age of 7 till I was 17. And it wasn't just me studying at theatre school. I was actually a professional actor during this whole period, so I was working during that whole time. I was in TV shows and bit parts in TV films, and I did a lot of theatre. So I was a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company from the age of 9 till I was 17. So this wasn't just a career as a child actor. This is something that I was going to pursue into my adulthood and something that I was very passionate about. However, I did have a very strong interest in design, and my dad, he owned a printing company, but he was also an artist, and he taught me how to draw. And I've got very fond memories of us in my bedroom with sort of... I used to have a particular interest in architecture, actually, so I was always drawing buildings with him and shopping malls, and I used to draw the house that I imagined I would live in when I was older and the sort of interior of it, which is always very opulent. I also had a strong interest in fashion. Well, in fact, I was actually obsessed with fashion. I used to buy Vogue religiously every single month, not just from the UK, but from all over the world. I used to love Vivienne Westwood and John Galliano and Gianni Versace, and I used to fashion sketch all the time. And when I was 17, I decided that I wanted to enter a competition which was called the Young Designer of the Year Award, and this was judged by the legendary Vivienne Westwood. So I was fortunate enough to win the Young Designer of the Year award, and I got to meet Vivienne backstage at the awards ceremony at the show. And I approached her very tentatively with this autograph book and pen, and I said, "Oh, Miss Westwood, can I have your autograph book?" And she took the book and she took the pen and she wrote her phone number down. And I was kind of gobsmacked, and she said, "Look, why don't you give me a call?" She said, "If you want to go into fashion and you want to pursue this as a career, why don't you come to the studio in London, spend a couple of days with me, and we can show you how things work." Well, I was just literally floored. I went back to the Midlands, packed my bag, and phoned her, and then I spent 2 days with Vivienne in her studio. And it wasn't kind of with the design team, it was with Vivienne in her studio, which was like a quarter of the size of this stage. And she was so generous with her time. She taught me through her inspiration behind her fashions. She taught me about the history of art and literature. I was party to all the meetings she was having, and it was an incredible time. And at the end of the 2 days, I showed Vivienne and her husband, Andreas, a book of outfits that I'd been sort of drawing over the past 6 months. And this is kind of 2 of the sketches that were in the book that I showed her. There was about 100 outfits in there. And when she got to the end of the book, she said, "Well, look, you can stay as long as you want. I can't pay you," she said, "but you can work with the design team, you can work in the pattern cutting team, you can work here as an intern. We might be able to take you to Paris." And she said, "It's up to you." So I jumped at the chance. All the money that I'd earned from doing my acting up until that point, I ploughed into moving to London, and I worked with Westwood for 10 months. And she also took me to Paris twice during Fashion Week, and my job in Paris was to dress the models. This was my model, somebody called Kate Moss, I think. This is actually, I put this image on because it's actually the outfit that I put her in for the show, or rather didn't quite put her in. And I was Kate Moss's dresser because she was the shortest model and I was the shortest dresser. So I always used to get Kate when we did the shows. But it was an incredible experience for somebody who was 17 turning 18. And I was like a sponge at that point. And I was thinking to myself, well, look, I don't really want to pursue a career in acting. I really want to go into fashion. And I want to study fashion. What I wanted to do was study at Central St. Martin's. But funnily enough, Vivian kind of was very anti me going to college. She felt that when you go to fashion school or any kind of school, you're homogenized and they kind of put you in a box and creatively you won't be free enough. She said, if you want to be a fashion designer, you can do it yourself. You can learn how to sew, you can pattern cut, and you've either got the talent or you haven't. So it's very interesting that I ended up pursuing a career that I wasn't formally trained in. So, however, at that point anyway, I decided fashion school was important. So I applied to Central St. Martin's, and I got a place there. And this image is one of the outfits that I created for my graduate collection in 2000. And actually, you can sort of see the frustrated product designer already in that outfit. There's kind of like an architectural structure to it. But I really enjoyed being at St. Martin's. It wasn't everybody's cup of tea. It was, you know, they don't teach you how to sew. They don't teach you how to pattern cut. But what they do there is they teach you how to think like a designer and how to think like an artist. And I've taken that training and I've put it into my professional work today. You know, in a sense, it's all about research, it's about sketching. You create a prototype, you do a sample, you do a production run, and then you sell it. So there's actually kind of not much difference between doing that with a chair and doing it with a frock. You know, it's the same process. So I valued my experience at Central St. Martin's, but it's expensive. It's expensive to live in London and be a student, and I had to work while I was studying. And actually, up until that point, I've been working in a sex shop in the West End of London, which sounds kind of very fun and very edgy, but it was actually very boring. And in my final year, I decided that I wanted to work for myself. And I had an interest in interiors, so I used to kind of decorate my flat. I used to make these mirror frames that I'd sell on Portobello Market on a weekend sometimes. I lived in Notting Hill at the time. So I decided to go around to bars and restaurants around Notting Hill and London and ask if they wanted any interiors advice, or I could do some paint effects, or I could do upholstery or make curtains. And I started to kind of get this little business together, and it started to grow, and I was doing this in more and more venues around London. And at the time I graduated from Central St. Martin's, I was asked by one of the bar owners I've been doing this for to design a whole venue from scratch. And this was the first bar that I designed in 2003, and it was called Nylon. And initially, they had a very, well, it was kind of a measly budget of around £50,000, which I think is around 100,000 Canadian dollars. But it was a huge venue in the city, in the business district. And they asked me if I'd sort of bring some friends from St. Martin's and do some paint effects and all that kind of stuff. And I got a friend of mine called Mackie, who I studied with. And because we were so naive about budgets and everything else, we kind of elaborated this whole massive sort of design scheme. And the owners of the venue absolutely loved it. And they decided to get investment into the project and ended up spending 1.5 million Canadian dollars on the project. So it's a lesson I have to learn on every project, actually. But it was an incredible project. And in a sense, myself and Mackie didn't really know what we were doing. But that kind of sort of those lack of boundaries that we had allowed us to be very creative and very free in our thinking. So we designed the interior, we designed the space planning, we designed a lot of the furniture, the lighting. They appointed architects. We worked with the architects on their drawings, the contractors. We project managed the whole thing, and it took about 9 months to do. And it was like an intensive training course, but on a live project for interiors. And that was our training ground, really, for what happened next. So Nylon opened in 2003. It became very successful, and it won the Evening Standard Bar of the Year award. And after that point, myself and Mackie started getting offered lots of work doing similar things in bars and restaurants around London. So after this, we decided to open a company together called Miele. Now, it was another crossroads for me as a designer, because up until that point, I'd still been thinking I'm going to be a fashion designer. And it's important to let you know that I didn't want to work for another design brand. When I left St. Martin's, everybody was going for job interviews in Paris, and I didn't want to work for anybody else, and I didn't want to leave London. It was important to me to work for myself. So whether it was fashion or whether it was interiors, it was my own business. It was creative. My design vision was being put into reality, and we were making money from it. So we decided to pursue a career with Miele, designing bars and restaurants around London and the UK. And we did around about 25 venues. These are sort of selection of some of the venues we designed over the 4 years that we worked together. And it was really the sort of training ground for what happened next. So in 2006, Mackie decided that she wanted to move back to her native Japan, and I decided that I wanted to start a company myself under my own name with my own brand. So in 2007, I launched Lee Broom. And the idea was to continue to do interiors projects, but to have more of a focus on furniture and lighting and products. During my experience of working with Mackie, we always used to design bespoke products for the interiors. So we'd kind of built up a network of manufacturers within the UK that I still use from time to time now, who could create the furniture and lighting that we were designing. So I set up Lee Broom. I did it in my flat in South London. I had one assistant who was an intern at the time, and I released my first collection in 2007, which was called Neo Neon. And it debuted at the Brick Lane Gallery during the London Design Festival. And it was a collection of antique furniture pieces which were adorned in a neon lighting. And the idea was to take something very traditional that had a very traditional silhouette, and to kind of emphasize that and highlight that in a very contemporary way. I didn't really have any expectations about the collection. I just wanted to do this sort of design vision that I had for this collection. But it became very successful, and we then designed a collection 2 times a year after that since. And that really takes us to now. So from a flat in South London to my design studio in Shoreditch and my flagship showroom and store, we have 20 members of the team. We also have another site which is called our factory in Bow, where we have a workshop. We've designed now over 75 products which we manufacture and we retail. We sell our products in over 160 stores worldwide in 40 different countries. And in 2012, I was lucky enough to win the British Designer of the Year award. And last year, we won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Export, which is the biggest accolade that any business can get within the UK. And I was fortunate enough to meet the Queen last year, which is a very exciting moment for me. So it's been an incredible 8 years and a lot of twists and turns before that to get to that point. And I want to talk about how those twists and turns have specifically influenced the products and the interiors and the shows that I've created. And the first product that I would like to talk about is my hanging hoop chair. And I bring this up first because it's really, I think it's a product that sort of typifies me as a designer. When you walk into a space, it commands attention. Even when you go to sit in it, it turns around and it swings. So there's a kind of playfulness about it. You have to interact with the piece, and it's a conversation piece. So it has an element of theatricality about it. And this is obviously something that stems from my theatre background. And look, I don't purposefully channel that. Remember, I was a child at the time, so it's kind of instilled in me to sort of see everything as a performance or a show in a way with the products. They're not shy pieces, if you like. And then there are more sort of literal references to the theatre. And this is our carousel pendant light, which is a succession of brass tubes in a circle which have light bulbs set within them. And this kind of reminds me of spending a lot of time in theatre looking at myself in a mirror with loads of light bulbs around. So there's always light bulbs in theatre, and this is one of those pieces that was inspired by that. And then back to the neon. There's always a story in the pieces that I've created, and I think it's important if you're going to create, well, expensive pieces of furniture and potential sort of heirlooms of the future that people are going to hopefully pass down onto generations, you want to have a story attached, and you want to let them know the kind of history of the manufacturing or, you know, the inspiration behind it. And piece was something that it was a chair that I found in Brighton, which is a seaside town in the south of England where I have a flat, and I tend to go there and do most of my designing there. It's a very eclectic place. There's lots of mental characters there, but it's really beautiful. And I found this chair on the street, and it was very dilapidated, but still in good tact. And I took it back to the studio, and I wanted to do something with it, but I kind of thought it must have had pride of place in somebody's home at some point for years. So I kind of wanted to revive that, but without forgetting the journey that it's been on. So we did nothing to the chair. We didn't restore any of it except for adorn it in this turquoise-colored neon light, which kind of almost gives it this ghostly effect. So it's kind of about the story, the kind of drama of the piece that I want to sort of let people know about the integrity of the designs that I produce when they buy them. And similarly, our carpentry sideboard. Now, this is probably one of my favorite pieces that I've designed because I knew how much kind of stuff went into it. But essentially, I was kind of intrigued about how stately homes across the West have sort of used these Persian rugs as a sign of Western wealth, although the design is very Middle Eastern, so I was kind of fascinated by that. So I decided to take this sort of Persian design and make it completely British. So if you look in the carpet, you'll see the Tudor rose in the middle and the Queen's crown jewels and the Queen's scepter and the LB monogram and English roses and English daisies. But from a distance, it looks completely Persian. And then it's on the front of a sideboard as well, which is a surreal kind of notion in itself. And when you open up the cupboards and the drawers, it kind of comes to life. And a lot of people who see this piece don't actually, well, they see photographs of it, don't actually realize that it's carpet. And that's what I like about it. When you see things in reality, it gives a whole nother kind of feeling to it, and you sort of have more of an emotional attachment to it. And actually, it's a very royal piece, because the guys who produced the carpet for me also produced the carpets for Buckingham Palace. And then we decided to elaborate on this piece for my show in Milan last April, and we brought it back, and I decided to do some sketches around kind of almost like a flying carpet idea, which we developed into a chaise longue. So it's the idea that somebody's almost kind of whipped the rug up like that, and it's stuck in its position, and then you can lounge on it. So again, another very dramatic piece with a lot of history and a lot of story and a lot of interesting manufacturing techniques behind it. So there's obviously the theatricality behind the products, and then there's also the theatricality behind the presentations. And when I'm designing, I'm not just thinking about the product itself. I'm not just thinking about the person's home it's going to be in. I'm thinking about the whole atmosphere around it, how it's going to be presented, and the theatricality of the show. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to elaborate on that sort of year after year. And it's important for me when I present a show that it isn't just a product on a plinth, that people are taken on a bit of a journey. So in Milan last year, I designed a 25-piece collection, which was our largest collection to date, from furniture to lighting and accessories. And I wanted to have an interesting way of presenting them. So we took over this row of disused shops in the San Gregorio district of Milan, and we knocked through all the shops 4 weeks before Milan, and we created one giant department store on 2 levels, where all of the collections could be displayed in the various different departments, but in more of a kind of cinematic pastiche of a department store, so more of a kind of surreal experience. So before I go into a bit more detail, what I want to do is play you a film of the show, because it gives you, it's only a short film, but it gives you a sense of really what it was like and what it was like to be there. It's always my intention when I put on an exhibition to create a show, to create a real experience, which stems from my background in theatre and fashion and interiors. And what I hope is that people enjoy the journey and that they appreciate the products, but also all the other details that we've put in and all the finer elements that make it fun but very formal as well. So we have 20 to 25 new pieces, so it's a large collection, and I wanted to find an environment where I could display those pieces that made sense. There are around 10 different collections within those 25 pieces. I came across this street of disused shops on Via Capellini, and immediately I was like, okay, this would make a perfect Lee Broom department store. And the idea is that when you walk into the space, you're taken on a journey. And then the pieces that you see within those departments add as the thread into each next section. I was very much inspired by photographers such as Man Ray and Horst and this surreal black and white imagery. And that's why everything's in grey except for the products, which are standing out in very vibrant colours or materials. We have a number of pieces which we're using new materials for, such as steel, acrylic and stained glass, and we're also using wood in this collection, which we haven't touched on much before. And then also we're using materials that we've used a lot of before, such as marble and crystal, and the idea is to explore new aesthetics with those pieces. So for instance, our crescent light is a typical Art Deco style globe light. It's a very iconic light, but it's been sliced down the middle and then it's been sort of positioned asymmetrically to reveal this brass fascia. So again, it's seeing something that you've seen before, but not quite in this way. At the end of the journey in the department store, the last department is the stock room, and this is a really fun area. It's the place where we're presenting pieces from older collections, but very much in a stockroom style. The department store being a British invention, it was fun to put in some British quirky items, such as a London taxi, and we have a Lee Broom London taxi which is parked outside the store and it's travelling around Milan. So it's not just about the product, it's about the whole experience itself, and people, when they come in, they see lots of different details that they didn't see the first time. And often when going on the journey through the store, people will go around once and then they'll have another look again just to take everything in. So we actually drove the taxi from London to Milan. So we still have the taxi in our factory in Bow. We sometimes take it out and sort of threaten to pick people up in London. So really, it's all about the detail, and that also stems from my interiors background, being able to put on these shows that have so much detail to them. So from the clock tower as you enter the store, which has the mannequins holding the lights, to the ladies' accessories on the left, where we had antique fans and gloves and scarves and hat pins and jewelry boxes, but all blown out in grey except for the products themselves. And the hats as well. My sister is a milliner, so she created these hats in grey cinema that were inspired by the shapes of the products that we were releasing that year. And then we had our shoe department where you see the hanging hoop chair, and we had Lee Broom labels in the shoes, and we'd customized all the pieces, and the Lee Broom perfumery where we had our own brand of perfume on display alongside all the cut crystal products. So it's all of those details with the music and the staff in their Vivienne Westwood outfits. And you know, Milan is a really stressful experience for everybody, so I kind of wanted to create this sort of haven where people could walk in and kind of go, you know what I mean? Because it is stressful, and it did have that effect, so we were very pleased with the results. So the idea was, again, every year to continue to do this, and for the London Design Festival, what we normally do in September is we have our showroom and we radically transform it into something unrecognizable from the year before. And we wanted to do the same last year. And we were launching a collection of vases called Podium, which are glass vases which are kind of balancing on these marble bases, which you can interchange between each other. So I wanted something that kind of linked to the department store, but wasn't the same. So we decided to open a Lee Broom flower shop. And we had 4,000 flowers on display in the store, which we actually displayed ourselves. I sent my interior designer on a floristry course, and she came back, and I was like, right, we need a flower wall. And she was like, oh, I can do a vase. I can't do a wall. But it was really kind of displaying the flowers to mimic the products, so either mimicking the shapes or the materials, the colors. We had flowers growing in display cases and flowered walls. We also had a flower shop kitchen in the basement where we were serving edible flowers and edible flowered drinks. So it's not just about the products or the vases, it's kind of walking into the space and smelling the flowers, seeing the products, hearing the music, tasting the flowers. It's a whole sensory experience. And you can see the flowered wall. This is something like ridiculous, like 1,000 red carnations on the wall, which kind of really pops out the collection in front. And this is actually a collection that I wanted to talk about in brief. It's called the Drunken Collection. And it's actually one of my favorite pieces that I designed that we launched in Milan. And the reason it's called the Drunken Collection is because in the UK, when you're working with builders and you're putting something, or you're sort of putting a shelf or a picture up and they're like, it's wonky, they always say, oh, it looks pissed, which means it's drunk. So this is why we called it the drunk table, because it's on a slant. But this piece for me also has a kind of fashion edge to it. And obviously there's my fashion background and my fashion training, and this obviously comes into the collections that I design. And actually, I would say I probably run my business more like a fashion brand than I would an interiors and products brand, in the fact that we have 2 collections a year. Each season, we're not afraid to kind of experiment with new materials and new aesthetics and new styles, much like in fashion, where they kind of change the length or they change the fabrics, but you have an overarching house style. And that's how we kind of run it here. We could probably design crystal products for the rest of my days and they'd sell very well, but that's not the point. The point is, as a designer and for my team, that we experiment with new materials and we challenge ourselves and we push ourselves. And then there's also the pieces that are more obviously influenced by fashion. And this would be our salon collection. And I think for this collection of upholstery pieces, this is the closest I've been to garment making in product design. The idea that I wanted to create furniture pieces that had as little seams as possible. So I worked with the manufacturers on the patterns, and I would change the pattern and kind of almost do it like I was doing a sort of fashion garment, similar to what you saw in my graduate collection. And then we have the studs as well. And obviously studding and upholstery isn't new. It's something that's been around for hundreds of years. It's a technique to hide all the manufacturing details. But we've taken that idea and exaggerated it, almost like a sort of Givenchy piece of luggage, or kind of that punk couture. And then there's also the lighting pieces. I mean, this, when I'm designing anything, when I'm sketching, I sketch lots, I have like dozens and dozens of sketchbooks. And then occasionally what I will do is I'll have a break and I'll design a piece of jewelry or a shoe or something, like a fashion garment, and it's kind of almost like a break. And then sometimes everything gets mixed up and then you get a light that looks like a piece of jewelry, which kind of works out very well. And this is our ring light, and it's a brass spear, which is pierced by a circular fluorescent tube. And then there's my fashion influence in my interiors. We still continue to design interiors. We do bars and restaurants and so forth, but also fashion retail. And I think we're pretty well placed to design fashion retail. And this is one of the stores that I designed a couple of years ago for Christian Louboutin. And Christian phoned up the office a couple of years ago and asked me to visit him in Paris because he was a fan of some of the products. And he wasn't actually aware that I designed interiors. And I met him and I had an amazing day, and we just talked and chatted. And then by the time we finished, he ended up offering me to design one of his stores in London. And this is actually his biggest store in the world, which is in Harrods department store. And normally what Christian likes to do is wherever he's got a store located, he'll design the interior inspired by the city that it's in. And he had a couple of stores in London, but he hadn't done anything that was inspired by Britain. So what I wanted to do, as Harrods is quintessentially a very British London store, I wanted to do something that was very British. So you'll see on the front, we've kind of done a recreation of the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. And also it's a concession within a store, and I didn't want it to look like that. It needed to look like a shop within a shop, if you like. And if you know much about Louboutin shoes, which I'm sure some of you do, women queue up to, like, you know, outside the store. So I was aware of this, and I wanted them to kind of queue up outside of these window displays before they're allowed to go into the space. And then in the interior, it's kind of a playful take on London. So we have the tube tiles from the London Underground, and we have the lampposts, same as the ones in Piccadilly, which we've used to display the handbags and the shoes. And you can see the clock face of Big Ben. And we opened up the actual windows, which they hadn't done in Harrods before. So we were getting natural daylight in. And then we put a sort of foggy scene of London in the background. So again, it's sort of very much combined my aesthetic and Christian Louboutin's aesthetic, which is also very theatrical. And when people go into the space, again, it's not just about the product, but they're taken on a journey. And even actually the tube tiles, we did a CL monogram tube tile with a pair of shoes on, and you just don't see it until you look very closely. So it's those finer details that are important. And I like to adopt the same philosophy when it comes to designing bars and restaurants. And this is a bar and restaurant that I designed in London last year called Old Tom and English. It's in Soho. It's a basement venue. It's a destination venue. It's always difficult to get people into basements, particularly in the summer. But they wanted to have a restaurant with a very personal style. So we kind of like forgot all the rules about how you set up a restaurant, and I turned it into the idea that when you walk in there, you feel like you're walking into somebody's apartment for a cocktail party or a dinner party. And actually all the sort of couches and the seating areas, they all have their own little furniture pieces next to them which transform into mobile bar units. So when the waiter or the waitress comes up, they finish the cocktail in front of you, they put the drinks there. So there's kind of a bit of theatricality around the service. And it was important to me not to just design the interior and then bugger off. It was kind of like, you know, you have to think about how the service interacts with the design and vice versa. And kind of when people go in there, it's very intimate. It's almost a little bit intimidating. And by the end of the night, it's very raucous. It's like a sort of house party. So, and I think the decor really reflects that idea. And also in our products, it's an opportunity for me to put some of the newer products that I've designed into the space. And then sometimes I design products for the interior then that we might release as a product after. So the interior inspires the products and vice versa. And in Old Tom and English, it was the time when we were debuting my Nouveau Rebel collection, which is a collection of marble lighting. And you can see some of the marble pieces above the bar there. And this is our chamber light. And really, it kind of typifies something that I do a lot of my design work, is to take opposites and put them together. So this very solid marble material, very heavyweight, very dense, and then encasing it in this crystal vessel. And this is probably one of the favorite pieces that I've ever designed, probably because of the manufacturing processes. And we have a very strong relationship with the manufacturer, particularly in traditional manufacturing techniques. And they really kind of spur on ideas for me for new products. And this is a marble tube light. It's milled from one solid piece of marble to 1/4 of an inch thick. And then it has an LED light running through, which sort of kind of illuminates through the translucency of the marble. But this hadn't been done with Carrara marble before. It had been done in alabaster. And my factory that I was working with in Italy were like, no way, there's no way you can do it. It's too long. We won't be able to polish it. And then eventually they would send me broken bits of this light in the post just to show me that it couldn't be done. And eventually the bits got bigger and bigger and bigger. And they have one man who can hand polish this in Florence for me, and he manages to get it right every single time. So we sort of have to, we're at the sort of limits of the manufacturer as designers. And it's interesting because we give them things sometimes they've been doing for like over 100 years that they've never done before, and we learn from them at the same time. So it's a really wonderful collaboration with the traditional craftspeople. And this is also a take on a classic sort of fluorescent tube light, which is kind of your everyday sort of ugly light fitting that you get in factories or warehouses. And I like the idea of taking something like that and then turning it on its head and creating something very luxury, which is the same philosophy really that we had for our crystal bulb, which is probably our most iconic piece of lighting that we've created. And it's also, again, it sort of has a sort of fashion background to it, because up until this point of 2012, when we launched this product, I was designing pieces that sort of retailed at around sort of £1,000. And I wanted to create a product that was more accessible, but still didn't sort of, its craft hadn't been jeopardized. And much in the same way, if you think of Chanel, you know, you'd be a fan of Chanel brand, you like covet the Chanel handbag, you always want one, but you can't afford one, but you can buy the lipstick, and it will be the most expensive lipstick you will probably ever buy, and it will be the best quality lipstick you will ever buy. And it's the same with this, it's introducing a different audience into the brand, but without compromising the design or the manufacture. It's your bit of Lee Broom, but it's our most accessibly priced product, but it's the most expensive light bulb you will ever buy, at around 210 Canadian dollars, I think, available at Klaus. And again, the kind of aesthetics of this piece, I think its popularity, you know, we've sold over 20,000 of this light fitting since we launched it in 2012. And I think part of its popularity is that idea of putting two things together that you haven't seen before, kind of reinventing the industrial light bulb. So taking the industrial light bulb with a very decorative cut crystal whiskey glass and putting them together in a way that you haven't seen before. So immediately, when people see the product, there's a familiarity with it. They've seen it before, but not quite in that way, and I think that's why it's popular. And I adopt the same philosophy to other pieces and more recent pieces. So our crescent light that we launched in Milan last year, it's a very different aesthetic, but it's the same philosophy, taking the classic Art Deco globe and then slicing it down the middle asymmetrically to reveal this brass fascia. So it's taking something that you've seen before and representing it in a very different way. And I've always said that as a designer, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel of design here. I just want people to look at things in a very different way. So all of my background, all of the stories that you've heard have really influenced everything that I've talked about today, from my theatre background influencing the drama that I put into my products and to my interiors, but also I think the confidence that that training gave me to be able to pursue disciplines that I wasn't necessarily trained in. And my fashion background and how I run my business, working with Vivienne Westwood, who taught me to look to the past to create contemporary products. And the interiors that I've designed as well, and the products that I've released for those interiors, you know, products for real spaces, for real people. And I hope that all the future experiences that I have will continue to inspire all of my work. And I hope that you'll all be on that journey with me. Thank you very much for listening.
With the entrepreneurial people all around us right now trying to design, prototype, and then sell, we can't afford not to be successful. So if we do, in your case, if you do the big production run and it doesn't sell, whose money is at risk there?
Well, it's my money at the end of the day, but I think one of the reasons why I've been able to create products like this is because I've been multidisciplinary. And I always say to people who are like, you know, I can't afford to start my own product design label, or I can't afford to sort of do the prototypes. It is very expensive. But remember, I was doing interiors at the same time as well. So there was a point when that used to fund absolutely everything. And then there was a tipping point when the products took over the interiors areas. And I say to designers, you have to be multidisciplinary if you're going to work for yourself and produce pieces. But in terms of kind of starting out for designers, I always say start with small runs and start in your, you know, in your kind of local areas producing things. And that's exactly what I did, and that became my fascination with British manufacturing, because there were so many kind of brilliant craftspeople who I could work with. And by the way, the recession had kind of stopped all their orders of tens of thousands of products, so that they were kind of more happy to start working with younger designers like myself on smaller product runs.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm from Moscow.
Hi, Anna.
Sheridan student now. I have a question. When you design product, do you think about how much it will cost, or design is the main point?
So design is the first and foremost point. When I'm designing things, it's kind of like, I guess, if you're in a brainstorming session, if somebody comes up with a no, we can't do that, then it shuts everything down. I kind of approach it the same way when I'm designing. I'm very free in how I think, and that's how I've started. I think it's attributed to my success, and that's how I'll continue to do it. And once I've decided on pieces that I want to release, then we start looking at the price points. But within my range, we probably have kind of 3 different price points. We have our made-to-order, incredibly expensive pieces. We have our mid-range, which we might have a few items of stock. And then we have our stock products, which are a little bit more accessible, but still at a high designer price point. And we can start to gauge that as we start looking through the designs and the collections.
This question came after I saw this long marble thing, because if you have one specialist in Florence,
Yes.
who can
Yeah.
polish it, it can cost tons of money.
Yeah, well, we're looking for another person to help
I
him.
see. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your candor and sharing the details of your evolution.
Thank you.
I just wonder, as well as just design for the sake of something different, are you thinking about improving a product or improving its functionality, or as our population is shifting to more limitations physically on large numbers of the population, is that getting included, or is it not part of the process?
I mean, look, I'll be really honest, not so much. I mean, I think the thing is that I work from a very kind of emotional side, and I work from a very aesthetic side. And I know that, you know, some people might criticize that notion, sort of like form follows function, etc. But look, at the end of the day, we would never have the arts and crafts movement if everybody was thinking like that then. And as a designer, I also have a responsibility to not release crap. I mean, I think that's the point. We do hundreds of designs, and there are lots of things that I could probably release that I know would also sell very well, but I won't do it because it has to have the integrity. And myself as a designer and as an artist, I kind of owe that to myself, you know? And so we do have a responsibility even from an aesthetic point of view.
Thank you. When you do your presentations, do you ever use performance art to enhance your design?
Not yet, no. I mean, we're always thinking of like interesting ways of presenting the products, and you know, we have our budgets to consider as well, you know, which is always a pain in the arse. But you know, we kind of, yeah. I mean, it's kind of limitless, I think, what we can do. I have sort of big aspirations of how we'd like to present things, so we may well include something like that at some point in the future.
I was thinking of your theater background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, actually, when people ask me what would be my dream project, I always say a pop concert. I would love to design a sort of theatrical experience. And I'm sure one day at some point, all of those things will combine in some kind of event. I don't know what yet, but I'm sure it will.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm looking at your light bulb, and it looks like a very complicated piece of manufacture. And I'm wondering, are you working with several different vendors on that and doing the assembly in-house when you make that?
For the crystal bulb?
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, it's 2 parts. So we have the crystal blown and hand cut in the Czech Republic, and then we have an LED that then screws into the bulb. So actually, when the LED eventually runs out, which you're talking a few years, you can unscrew that and replace that. And we actually developed the LED ourselves because, as you know, the LED technology is kind of sometimes almost behind what designers want and what they need for projects. So we eventually developed our own, and we have those two components that we put together in our assembly factory in the UK.
Hello? Do you contract out, like the top piece looks like it's a spun metal piece? Is that contracted out as well, or do you do some of that actually in your own factory?
For the pendant fitting,
Yeah.
that's also made in the UK, not by our factory, but by another factory. So sorry, yeah, actually it's 3 pieces. I mean, I always see the bulb as one piece because we sell it on its own, and then the pendant is a fitting that you can buy separately to put in there. So yeah, it's 3 different manufacturers, which can sometimes be complicated from a logistical point of view, but it's kind of a necessary evil of creating your own products.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Lee.
Hello.
I was just wondering what's next for Lee Broom. Like, what are your future plans?
We're working on our next show for Milan, which will be in April. And it's going to be a very different show from last year. We're going to be doing a smaller show with a much smaller product launch. But it was always my intention not to do a huge show every single year. I think it's kind of boring, the idea of somebody thinking, you know, oh, they have to better themselves every single year. I quite like the idea of bringing it back to something very small, which is actually far more challenging than doing something larger, to create something smaller that has as much impact. So we're working on that, and it has 1 new lighting collection within that launch. And we're going to be launching in New York as well during ICFF, and we're doing something in Design Miami at the end of the year as well, and a number of interior projects in the middle of all of those as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, you've worked on your own and then with Mackie and a team. How do you find that working with other people has changed or influenced your design perspectives?
Well, it's very difficult to delegate as a designer. It's always hard, but it's difficult to delegate anything when you own your own company, and it's an art form in itself to learn how to do that. I think once you learn to let go of things, then you can develop. Now, actually, as the team has grown a lot larger, and we have a logistics team and a sales team, design team, production team, and whatnot, actually, I get more time to design now than I did, 3 years ago when I was looking after much more of those kind of operational aspects. So in a sense, it's gotten kind of more creative for me. I have more time to design, which is ideal.
That's interesting. Anybody else? No? I just had one question. I just wondered what the Queen said to you when you shook her hand.
She said, "Congratulations on your award." Yeah.
Very personal.
Thank you very much.